They say everyone has a price. Mine was $5,000 a week to watch a woman I'd never met. No questions asked. Just observe, document, report. Katherine Volkov. Elegant, untouchable, mysterious. Her husband wanted to know if she was having an affair. Simple assignment. Corporate espionage had taught me to stay detached, invisible, but nothing prepared me for what I'd find, or how watching her would unravel everything I thought I knew about desire, loneliness, and the careful lies we tell ourselves. By the time I discovered her secret, it was already too late. I'd crossed a line I didn't even know existed. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, thick and expensive, the kind of paper that whispered old money and darker secrets. Inside, a photograph slipped out. A woman in her late 50s, silver hair swept into an effortless chignon, cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. Katherine Volkov. Even in a candid shot, she looked like she'd stepped out of a European film from the 60s. "She's beautiful," I said, though I hadn't meant to speak aloud. My contact, a lawyer named Richard, adjusted his cufflinks. "Her husband thinks she's having an affair. He wants proof before the divorce proceedings." I was 57 and had been in private investigation for nearly 2 decades. Beautiful subjects weren't new. What caught my attention was the address, a penthouse in Brooklyn Heights overlooking the East River, and the fee. Dmitry Volkov was paying triple my usual rate. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you're a woman. She'll never suspect you." Richard slid another photo across the mahogany table. "And because you're discreet." The second photograph showed Katherine at a gallery opening, champagne flute balanced in manicured fingers, laughing at something just beyond the frame. A diamond bracelet caught the light. But it was her eyes that held me, pale blue, intelligent, containing multitudes. I should have said no. Instead, I took the case. The first week was textbook surveillance. Katherine's routine was precise, almost choreographed. Yoga at 6 a.m. at an exclusive studio in DUMBO. Coffee at a French cafe where the barista knew her order. Espresso, no sugar. Then the gallery she owned in Chelsea, a pristine space showcasing Eastern European contemporary art. She moved through the world like water, fluid and purposeful. Men watched her, women watched her. She seemed oblivious to all of it, contained within some private universe I couldn't access. I documented everything from my rented sedan across the street, camera with a telephoto lens, notes in shorthand. But each day I found myself watching longer than necessary. The way she touched paintings as if greeting old friends. How she'd pause before entering a room, composing herself. The rare, devastating smile she'd offer her assistant. A young man who clearly adored her. No suspicious meetings, no secret lovers, nothing. By Friday, I was beginning to think Dmitry Volkov was paranoid. Then I followed her to the Bowery. She parked her silver Mercedes in front of a converted warehouse, checked her reflection in the side mirror, and disappeared inside. I waited 20 minutes before approaching. No business sign. No indication of what the building housed. My pulse quickened. The familiar thrill of discovery. I'd found something. What I didn't know was that something had just found me too. The warehouse was a private art studio, I discovered after some discreet inquiries with nearby shopkeepers. Rented under an LLC that took me 2 days to trace back to a name, Irina Kozlov. Another Eastern European, another woman. I ran a background check. Irina Kozlov, 62, originally from Prague, former ballet dancer with the Czech National Ballet, now a sculptor of some renown. Divorced, no children, living in a loft in the same building where she worked. Wednesday evening, I watched Katherine arrive again. This time, I was prepared. I'd sweet-talked the building super into believing I was a journalist writing about local artists. He let me into the stairwell. Fourth floor. I could hear music through the heavy door, something classical, strings that seemed to weep. I pressed my ear against the cold metal. Then I heard Katherine laugh. It wasn't the polite laugh from the gallery opening. This was unguarded, rich, intimate. The kind of laughter that suggested closeness, history, something that bloomed in private. My hand was on the door handle when footsteps echoed in the stairwell below. I retreated to the fifth floor, heart hammering, feeling like a voyeur rather than an investigator. The following week, I changed tactics. I became a regular at the cafe Katherine frequented, always there before her, always leaving after. I learned she took calls from her husband with visible tension, her jaw tightening, responses clipped. But when her phone buzzed with texts, sometimes her face would soften in ways that made her look a decade younger. I hacked her phone records. Most calls were business, but there were texts to a number registered to iCauselove, sent late at night, early in the morning. The content was encrypted, but the frequency told its own story. Thursday afternoon, I followed her to the studio again. This time, I waited in the cafe across the street, positioned by the window. 3 hours later, they emerged together, Katherine and Irina. Irina was taller, raw-boned, with steel gray hair cropped close to her skull. She wore men's trousers and a white button-down, sleeves rolled to reveal forearms marked with clay and paint. Where Katherine was polished elegance, Irina was striking in her severity, all angles and intensity. They stood on the sidewalk, and Katherine reached up to brush something from Irina's collar. The gesture was so tender, so familiar, that I forgot to breathe. Then Irina caught Katherine's hand, brought it to her lips, kissed the palm. Katherine closed her eyes. And I understood. Not an affair with a man. This was something else entirely. Something Dmitry Volkov hadn't even considered when he'd hired me to spy on his wife. I sat frozen as they parted. Katherine to her Mercedes, Irina back into the warehouse. I should have felt triumphant. I'd found the secret. Instead, I felt like I'd witnessed something sacred that I had no right to see. That night, I couldn't write the report. I sat at my laptop, cursor blinking. Katherine's face when Irina kissed her hand burned into my memory. What was I supposed to tell Dmitry Volkov? That his wife was in love with a woman? That she'd found something he clearly hadn't given her in their 26 years of marriage? I closed my laptop and poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey, and wondered when exactly I'd stopped being objective. I told myself I needed more evidence, that a single tender moment wasn't proof of an affair, that I was being thorough, professional. I was lying to myself, and somewhere deep down I knew it. I began following Irina, too. She taught sculpture classes twice a week at a community center in Brooklyn. Her students were mostly elderly, their hands unsteady but determined as they shaped clay. She was patient with them, encouraging, her severe face softening when a student made a breakthrough. Watching her, I tried to understand what Katherine saw. Irina wasn't conventionally beautiful like Katherine. She was all sharp edges and raw honesty, someone who'd clearly lived through hardship and emerged harder for it. But there was something magnetic about her presence, a kind of fierce authenticity that demanded attention. One evening, I watched them meet at a small Ukrainian restaurant in the East Village. They sat in a corner booth, intimate without touching. Katherine's wedding ring caught the candlelight as she gestured, animated in a way I'd never seen her with Dmitry. Irina listened with complete focus, as if Katherine were the only person in existence. I'd seen that kind of attention before. My ex-husband had looked at his mistress that way. The difference was, I'd never looked at him with the incandescent joy I saw in Katherine's face. They left separately, always careful. But I'd seen enough. I started having dreams about them, not sexual, though there was desire woven through everything. In my dreams, I watched them from doorways, through windows, always on the outside of something I couldn't name. I woke up at 57 years old, alone in my studio apartment, and realized I wasn't envying Katherine her affair. I was envying what she'd found. My marriage had ended 5 years ago when I discovered my husband's infidelity. Since then, I'd buried myself in work, in other people's secrets, in the comfortable numbness of solitude. I'd convinced myself that desire was something that had died with my marriage, that at my age such things no longer mattered. Watching Katherine and Irina was forcing me to confront the lie. 2 weeks into surveillance, I made a mistake. I followed Katherine to a rare bookstore in Manhattan, so focused on her that I didn't notice Irina until it was too late. She was already inside, waiting. I watched through the window as Katherine found her in the poetry section. No embrace, no kiss, the public space wouldn't allow it. But Katherine's hand brushed Irina's as she passed, and Irina's fingers closed around it for just a moment. Such a small gesture, but it held everything. I turned away, my chest tight. That night, I finally wrote the report. Clinical, factual, subject meets regularly with Irina Kozlov, female sculptor. Nature of relationship appears intimate. Recommend further investigation. I didn't mention the way Katherine looked at Irina, didn't describe the tenderness that made my throat ache, didn't confess that I'd spent 3 hours sitting in my car afterward, crying for reasons I couldn't fully articulate. I sent the preliminary report to Richard and waited. His response came within hours. Dmitri wanted photographic evidence, explicit proof. He wanted me to destroy her. I stared at the email until the screen blurred and made a decision that would change everything. I'd been in this business long enough to know how to get the photos Dmitri wanted. A telephoto lens through Irina's studio windows. Following them to whatever hotel they used for privacy. It would take a week, maybe less. Instead, I found myself parked outside the warehouse on a Friday evening, watching Katherine arrive. She wore jeans and a cashmere sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger, unguarded, happy. I couldn't do it, but I couldn't walk away either. Dmitry Volkov wasn't a man who accepted failure. If I didn't deliver, he'd hire someone else. Someone without hesitation. Someone who'd provide exactly what he wanted to use against Katherine in divorce proceedings that would destroy not just her marriage, but her reputation, her business, her carefully constructed life. I sat in my car as twilight deepened, paralyzed by indecision. Then my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I know you've been watching. We need to talk. K. My blood went cold. The address that followed was for a wine bar in Fort Greene. 30 minutes. I should have run. Should have deleted everything and disappeared. Instead, I drove to Fort Greene on autopilot, my investigator's mind racing through scenarios. How had she spotted me? When? What did she want? Katherine was already there when I arrived, seated at a corner table with a bottle of red wine and 2 glasses. She looked up as I approached, those pale blue eyes assessing me with unsettling calm. "Sit," she said, not a request. I sat. She poured wine into both glasses with steady hands. "You're good, I'll give you that. It took me 10 days to be certain I was being followed." "How did you—" "I grew up in Soviet-controlled Warsaw. My father was a dissident. I learned to notice surveillance before I learned to read." She sipped her wine. "The real question is who hired you, though I can guess." I said nothing. She smiled, sharp and knowing. "Dmitri, of course. He's suspected for months, though he doesn't know what he suspects." She leaned back, studying me. "What has he asked you to find?" "Evidence of an affair." "And have you found it?" Our eyes met. In that moment, I made a choice that had nothing to do with money or professionalism and everything to do with the strange, unexpected recognition I felt looking at this woman. "No," I lied, "nothing conclusive." Katherine's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering behind her composure. "You're lying to protect me. Why?" "I don't know," I admitted. And it was true. I didn't know why I was throwing away my career, my reputation, my fee. Maybe because what you have with her, it's none of his business. None of mine either. Her name is Irina, Katherine said softly. And I've loved her for 30 years. The confession hung between us, heavy with history. She told me then how they'd met in Prague in 1995, both married, both trapped. How they'd had one perfect summer before Katherine returned to New York and her arranged marriage to Dmitri. How they'd tried to forget each other and failed. How they'd reconnected 2 years ago when Irina moved to New York, and everything Katherine had buried came flooding back. I'm 60 years old, she said. I've spent my entire life being who everyone needed me to be. Dimitri's wife, the perfect hostess, the successful gallery owner, all of it true, and all of it a performance. Her voice cracked. Irina is the only place I've ever been real. I understood. God help me, I understood completely. What will you tell him? She asked. I thought about my empty apartment, my empty life, all the years I'd spent documenting other people's passion while feeling nothing myself. That I found nothing, I said. That you're faithful, that he's paranoid. He won't believe you. Probably not, but it'll buy you time. Katherine reached across the table, her hand covering mine. Her skin was warm, and I felt the touch like electricity. Thank you, she whispered. I should have left it there. Walked away, collected my partial fee, and forgotten Katherine Volkov existed. Instead, I heard myself ask, does it get easier, knowing what you want this late? Her smile was sad and beautiful. No, but it's better than the alternative. We sat in that wine bar until they closed, two women in our 50s, talking about desire and regret and the courage it takes to choose yourself. When we finally parted on the sidewalk outside, she kissed my cheek. If you ever want to stop watching other people's lives, she said, Irina and I have wine Thursdays. You'd be welcome. I watched her walk away and felt something crack open inside my chest. Maybe it was hope. I never sent Dmitri the photos he wanted. I told him his wife was clean, that his paranoia was destroying his marriage faster than any affair could. He didn't pay me, threatened to sue. I didn't care. 3 months later, Katherine filed for divorce. It was ugly, expensive, public. But she survived it. They both did. I know because I took her up on that invitation. Wine Thursdays became my religion. Watching Katherine and Irina together, the casual intimacy, the inside jokes, the way they'd built a life on their own terms, taught me more than 20 years of investigation ever had. I'm 58 now. Last month I joined their art collective. I'm learning to sculpt. My hands are finally creating instead of just documenting. And sometimes, when Irina's teaching me how to shape clay, her hands guiding mine, I think about second chances, about how it's never too late to stop watching life from the shadows and step into the light. What about you? Have you ever discovered something about yourself by witnessing someone else's truth? Share your story in the comments below.